COVID-19 is now spreading faster outside of mainland China. The outbreak has sparked fears not only of the disease itself, but the lasting impacts it may have on our global economy. Joining us live now is Dr Giovanni Di Lieto. He's a lecturer at Monash Business School. Appreciate your time, Giovanni. I know you specialise in international trade and investments. How do you see the coronavirus playing out for the global economy? We've already seen billions wiped from the markets. Are you expecting it will still get worse before it gets better?
Well, of course, it all depends on how long this crisis will last and how far it will stretch across the globe. So we're already seeing major disruptions to global supply chains across Asia and Europe. And of course, these now is pinching now the markets, the confidence of the markets, and also soon will be impacting also the consumer confidence. So this is quite unprecedented. Many are drawing a parallel to the 2003 SARS crisis, but we forget that China in 2003 only accounted for 4% of the global GDP, and now today China is at 20%. So, and you can see how this can pan out in terms of the global repercussions of the crisis.
And what does that mean for viewers sitting at home watching this interview? When you're talking about the disruptions to supply chains, what could that mean for day-to-day life?
Well, I think the crucial issue here is that today, more than ever, global supply chains of major corporations work on a just-in-time mode, which means that global multinationals tend to have very low stocks of parts, components, and everything that is required for complex supply chains. So this means that we have a very limited time span in which production can be halted or reduced. Until then, we start to have shortages of key components for producing nearly everything. So this is going to have clearly a major impact on the confidence of the markets in terms of forecasting for growth. So even if there is a rebound, even if the coronavirus crisis stops as expected or desired in the next month or so, it is being estimated that the Chinese economy year on year will have growth. The growth will have reduced to 2.5 to 4%, down from the current 6%, which had already been forecasted as the worst case scenario just even before the coronavirus crisis began. So this is going to have major long-term consequences in terms of growth plans and the global economy over the next year, I would say.
We just heard from the US President this morning. Donald Trump was calling for calm. He seemed to be playing down the risk, saying he expects markets will recover. What can governments actually do to try and protect their economies in the meantime?
Well, of course, calm is paramount here. And of course, authorities are trying to do their best to limit the damage that this crisis can have. Of course, there are two different components here, because one is the purely medical advice and issues that we might have. And of course, many say that the coronavirus is little more than a strong influence. But on the economic side, I think the situation can be trickier and much more critical because of the long-term consequences on the global supply chains and the financial markets that underpin those supply chains. And this I think we will feel the impact of this crisis over, way beyond the crisis will be extinguished in the next few months, I'd say.
Giovanni, I know you came to Australia after practicing law in Italy. No doubt you've been following the Italian cases closely. Do you have confidence in the handling of the virus by Italian authorities? I mean, the movement between borders in Europe doesn't bode well for containment strategies there.
Well, of course not. So, of course, Italy is very worried about the impact on tourism. The Easter season was about to begin, and it was having a huge impact. And also the fact that the outbreak occurred in highly industrialized northern regions also mean that this will have a critical impact on the German supply chain, especially in the car industry. And also we need to consider that whatever the authorities can do to try to cordon off those areas for the outbreak, we shouldn't forget that Europe has a free movement regime. So it doesn't really make sense that other countries are stopping travels from Italy, because you can only really stop travel from the whole of Europe. And even then, I don't know how this could work. So it's a particularly tricky situation. I guess the government is doing the best they can. But of course, it's uncharted territory here, so to speak. So we'll see, as I said before, also in relation to the global economy, it's also critical to maintain the calm on the medical situation, but also the economic downfall will be felt way beyond that. And it's interesting to see how now we have news of outbreak in more developed countries, also because there are better diagnosis of it. And we still have to hear from outbreaks in more vulnerable countries. And again, we don't know how this can be contained should the outbreak reach poorer countries that have a weaker infrastructure for facing this kind of crisis.
Time will tell. Giovanni Di Lieto, I appreciate your insights. Thank you.
You're welcome.